I slammed my truck into gear and tore down the dirt road to Cedar Ridge like the ground itself was chasing me. My hands so slick with sweat I could barely hold the wheel, my breath coming in short, angry pulls as Haley's voice rattled in my ear. She said Emma's face was swelling, her breathing sounded wrong. The school's ambulance was stuck on Route 9 behind a tractor-trailer that jackknifed across both lanes, and 911 couldn't get anyone to the trailhead anytime soon. I remember thinking the orange auto-injector in my glove box was a weird, lucky ritual, something I had kept since Emma's peanut scare 2 years ago, and suddenly that little tube was the only thing between her and a silence I wasn't ready for. "Get here now," Haley said, voice thin and shaking. "Please get here now." I told her I was on my way and floored it. Traffic on the highway had turned into a parking lot of brake lights and honking, so I cut across 2 lanes where I shouldn't have and felt the entire world narrow to a single line on my GPS that said 18 minutes. My mind did the math like a drunk man at a chalkboard. 18 to the lot, 12 to the meadow, maybe less if I tore across the trail. I kept talking to Haley on speaker because I needed something steady besides the pounding in my chest. "She's got hives, Dad," her throat. Haley choked on the words and I heard Emma in the background trying to say something that came out as a rasp. "Dad, it hurts," she whispered. That voice put a kind of fire under my feet I didn't know I had. I juked through a red light, felt a truck's horn scream at me and kept going because nothing else mattered. I remember crashing through the underbrush as if someone had lit a fuse behind me. Thorned branches tore my shirt and scratched my arms, and every step felt like a dollar I couldn't afford to waste. The path to the meadow was no joke. Roots like coiled snakes, gullies that wanted to swallow a man, and the air smelled like pine and wet leaves and something metallic that made my stomach flip. The kids in orange shirts were clustered in a messy ring, specks of bright color in a green sea, and the teacher was on her knees with half a dozen other parents trying to keep the group calm. When I shouted, "I've got an EpiPen," the circle split like curtains and they made a way for me, their faces full of panic and relief. I saw Emma then, smaller than I remembered, lips blown up, eyes tight as if trying to smother the pain, and a wetness at her throat that made me feel like I was watching a slow horror show. I didn't think, I acted. I shoved the orange tube into the soft part of her thigh through jeans because there was no time to do anything else, and I pushed until my shoulder ached and the world narrowed to 2 sounds. The rush of blood in my ears and the click that told me the medicine had deployed. "Hold still, baby," I said, though it felt ridiculous to try to command calm when my hands trembled with the aftershocks of the adrenaline. The injection burned a hot, awful burn that made me wish I could take it for her, and then we waited the longest 30 seconds of my life for her to breathe like herself again. She took a ragged inhale that sounded like a promise and then coughed. A wet, ugly sound that turned into a little gasp I almost didn't allow myself to believe. The teacher pulled a small clear bag from Emma's backpack and froze, her fingers trembling as she unfolded the note taped to the bag that said, "For Emma from your secret admirer," and listed things that should never have been in a child's lunch. Paramedics arrived not long after, moving with the calm speed of people who do this every day, but you could see it in their eyes my daughter had been close. They thanked me in that clipped, professional way that felt like a small funeral service averted, then started asking the kind of questions that make everything feel suspicious. What did she eat? Who handled her bag? Did anyone seem off that morning? I shoved the EpiPen into my pocket and followed the ambulance like a ghost, the skin on my arm still prickling from the shock. At the hospital, the ER was efficient and loud, monitors beeping like a second heartbeat, and the doctor's face when he told me how tight her airway had been made my chest hollow out. 2 more minutes, he said, and I felt the weight of what I had done settle over me like a wet blanket and a strange, fierce pride at the same time. I heard nothing for a terrifying minute, like the whole world had pressed a thumb over its mouth, and then Emma inhaled, real, ragged, like someone switching a light back on. Let out a noise that wasn't exactly a sob and wasn't exactly a laugh, just a raw thing that left my chest feeling hollow and full at the same time. Color crawled back into her lips in slow, stubborn bands, and for the first time since this started I could see the girl who calls me Dad instead of the stranger gasping on someone else's jacket. "Come on, baby," I whispered, holding her hand the way I'd held it when she fell off her bike, like I could anchor her to the world with skin and promises. Paramedics burst through the trees moments later, the kind of hurried calm you only see on TV and then never again when it's your kid. They moved with practiced steps and quiet commands, shouting out vitals and orders like a language I didn't know but needed to learn in a hurry. They set up an IV, lifted her onto a stretcher, and one of them, short hair, the look of someone who had seen worse, kept talking to her in a low, steady voice so she wouldn't drift. "Stay with me, Emma. Keep your eyes open for Daddy, okay?" he said, and she managed a ghost of a nod that made my chest clamp down hard. While they stabilized her, Haley, My sister-in-law, hands shaking but purposeful, rifled through the lunchboxes like a woman possessed and pulled out a small, sealed sandwich bag. She unfolded a piece of paper and held it like evidence, voice thin as she read the handwriting aloud. For Emma, from your secret admirer. Underneath, neat and almost clinical, was a list of ingredients I had read on medical forms a dozen times. Almond flour, cashew meal, shrimp extract. The exact things Emma was supposed to avoid, the very names listed on her school medical paperwork. My brain went cold in a way that felt physical, like someone had opened a freezer and shoved my face in. I didn't think of the kids, the teachers, or the trail anymore, only the bag and the note and the clean terror of intention. Someone had not only known what Emma was allergic to, they had targeted her. I shoved the bag at one of the medics, my voice coming out sharper than I meant. This was put in her lunch deliberately. The medic's face changed in a way you don't usually see, color leaving, eyes narrowing, mouth setting into a line that said, "This is not an accident." "We're notifying the ER and law," he said, tapping at his radio with hands that weren't shaking. He used the kind of words that make things official on the wire. Sorry for the quick interruption. If you're enjoying this so far, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and leave comment below. It really helps the channel grow. Alright, let's jump back into the story. They radioed ahead about suspected criminal intent and loaded Emma into the ambulance with more urgency than before, the gurney wheels humming like a heart turned up to speed. I ran behind them down the trail, through the mud and over the roots I'd just cursed, because getting away from that scene felt like letting something loose. My feet pounded and the world blurred into trees and breath and the ambulance's flashing lights ahead, and I felt equal parts fury and blank, like I'd been emptied of everything except a hot coal of protectiveness. When the ambulance door slammed, the paramedic turned to me and said, "Follow in your car, we need statements." His voice was flat but urgent, like someone who'd seen the worst and wanted to stop it from happening again. I didn't wait for a second invitation. I jumped into my truck and chased them to the hospital, every red light a hammer blow and every passing car a test of my patience. Fear and fury sat side by side in my ribs, each feeding the other, a twin engine that drove me faster than I knew I could go. I barreled into the emergency entrance with the sandwich bag clutched like a weapon, my hands shaking so hard the plastic crinkled and made that awful sound. And people looked at me like I'd lost my mind until I said, loud enough to cut through the murmurs, "Someone tried to poison my child." Saying it made the air change. A nurse stepped forward and took the bag without a word, like she'd been waiting for a reason to move faster than the system allowed. Two security officers pulled out phones and photographed the evidence while a triage nurse flagged a pediatric team down the hall. The place smelled of antiseptic and tired coffee, and I felt like I'd dragged a storm into their routine. They hooked Emma to monitors in a corner room that felt too small for the noise in my head, machines that beeped a steady rhythm while nurses placed IVs and checked pupils. Her face still had the swollen, alien look from the trail, but her fingers had color again, and her breathing sounded steadier even if it came in shallow waves. A doctor, pediatric ER doc, leaned in and used words that landed like bricks: multi-allergen systemic reaction, airway compromise, observation for 48 hours, prophylactic steroids, epinephrine on standby. He said they'd watch her for delayed secondary reactions and wanted me to sign consent forms for every step. I signed like a man who knows how to sign a life back into place. They told us she'd need a follow-up with an allergist within the week, someone who could map the danger like a minefield and tell us how to live with it. Haley was quiet, more still than I'd ever seen her, and when she finally spoke, she sounded like she was reading lines from a script. "We need to get to the bottom of this," she said, eyes fixed on Emma, and I felt a fierce knot in my chest tighten. The Principal Martin Blake, called while I was still trying to steady my hands, asking official-sounding questions about supervision, consent forms, and liability in a tone so corporate it made my skin crawl. He kept using phrases like protocol compliance and mitigating exposure, which felt like a cover for not wanting to be blamed. I hung up because I couldn't hold the fake calm he seemed to expect. A security officer took my statement right there in the ER, which felt strange and small compared to the enormity of what had happened, and then a woman introduced herself with businesslike efficiency, Detective Lisa Morales. She had a badge and a notebook and a way of looking at you that made you feel both seen and cataloged. She told me she'd been briefed, that the bag and the note would be collected as evidence, that she wanted to interview everyone who'd been at the trailhead. I said what I could remember, times, faces, the way Emma had been fiddling with her backpack at the picnic bench, and she wrote in short black ink as if carving the story into paper. Lisa asked that I not post anything anywhere, and she explained why in simple, cold terms that sunk into me. Killers and sick people look for ways to erase traces when they sense an investigation. If you put it online, she said, the person responsible might panic and destroy evidence, flee, or change their method. We need to control the flow of information. I heard the logic, but my gut wanted to scream it from a rooftop. I had a phone full of angry hands-on photos and a head full of questions. But I agreed because I wanted anything that might help catch whoever targeted my daughter. They rolled Emma to a room in pediatrics after making sure she was stable, the lights dimmer and the machines quieter, and I sat in the chair that had been there for years and suddenly held everything that mattered. Time in hospitals stretches and snaps. Minutes lose their meaning until someone brings coffee or a new nurse checks the IV and you realize you've been holding your breath. Haley and I slept in shifts in the plastic chairs, trying to catch a warm, useless sleep while monitors bleated like distant alarms. Every time someone opened the door, I flinched, imagining news, a suspect in cuffs, or worse, a doctor saying she'd taken a turn. In the morning, Detective Morales called to confirm names and times and to set up the station interview, professional and firm, promising to follow up on footage from the preserve entrance and the picnic area. She asked for every scrap of info, teacher lists, parent volunteers, bus assignments, and said the school's security cameras and the Trailhead's park camera were likely first stops. She also warned me again, quietly this time, about not sharing anything on social feeds. Let us run our lines, she said, and don't let rumors start. We need solid leads, not noise. I wanted to scream at the thought that someone had planned this, had targeted a child, but for the moment I put my anger where it could do the most good, firm answers, evidence in hand, and a promise to follow wherever this road led. I sat on that thin plastic chair like it was a dock in a storm, legs numb and hands folded over each other because breathing felt like work after the adrenaline finally left my body. And the police shuffled volunteer parents through the tiny interview room down the hall like cattle while I tried to keep my eyes on Emma in the next room. The hours crawled, and every beep from her monitor was a pinprick of hope. Midnight moved like molasses, and when she squeezed my hand, I leaned in close to catch what she managed to tell me, the words squeezed out through swollen lips that made every sound a fight. It was already stuck on my bag when we got on the bus, she whispered, small and fierce, and that single sentence knocked the floor out from under me in a way nothing before had. That memory changed everything the way a single bad fact can change a whole map. If the note was taped to her backpack at the bus, then someone had been in the school drop-off chaos, had had the time and nerve to plant it and vanish. The idea that it happened on school property, maybe within earshot of teachers or aides, made the building no longer a safe rectangle. It felt like a place with hidden doors and eyes you couldn't trust. I pictured the morning routine, cars lining up, kids swinging backpacks, teachers waving, and my stomach turned at the idea that someone had used that confusion to do something horrific. I felt small and furious all at once, like a parent whose tools had failed him at the moment they were needed most. We photographed the backpack, the note, everything that could be held up to light and frozen in pixels, making copies and sending backups to cloud folders because Detective Lisa Morales had a way of saying things that made you obey without feeling ordered. We cataloged timestamps and witnesses, made a list of who touched what, and filed chain of custody forms until the plastic chair under me seemed to sag with paper. Haley helped with everything she could, moving like someone trying to keep a house from burning down by carrying buckets of water, and her hands were steady even when her voice was. The nurse joked about hospital bureaucracy being a second job, and we laughed because the joke was a lifeline. Detective Morales came by that night with the quiet presence of someone who thinks in lists and angles, and she praised the way we'd preserved the scene. Good work, she said, praising our thoroughness in a flat tone that meant she wasn't just being polite. Then she told me about the handwriting, and her words felt like frost. The note looked deliberately messy, she explained, an attempt to disguise a regular script by forcing the offhand to write. That detail crawled under my skin because it meant planning and thought, not panic or a stupid prank. Whoever did this had rehearsed the little cruelty, had thought about how to hide their regular handwriting, and that made them colder in my head. Forensics took the plastic bag and processed it like it was a map to a person's face. They found a partial fingerprint and a smear pattern that matched someone removing a glove incorrectly, like they'd been in a hurry or scared or both. It wasn't enough for a clear ID, the detective warned, but it wasn't nothing either. It was a thread to pull. They photographed the smear, measured the print, and logged everything into evidence lockers with careful hands. I watched them work and tried to keep my pulse steady, because it felt like each click of their camera was a small promise that somebody on the other side of this mess would have to answer. They asked me questions I'd asked myself all night: who might have a grudge, who had access in the morning, and whether anyone had shown odd interest in Emma at school. I gave answers that felt both useless and like nails being driven into a board, names of parents, volunteer schedules, bus monitors, everyone who could have been close enough to tape a note inside a backpack. I thought about the teacher on duty, about the lunchroom volunteers, and about every face at drop-off. My list grew like a roster of suspicion, and I hated myself for it. Because real people lived behind those names, and the idea that one of them could do this felt like a betrayal that cut sharper than any physical wound. Detective Morales said they'd check camera footage from the school entrance, the parking lot, and the bus loop, and they'd interview staff and volunteers again under the weight of new facts. She asked me to keep quiet, to let the investigation move without outside noise, and I agreed because I trusted her, and because the thought of tipping off whoever had done this made the air around me cold. I left the hospital room for short breaks in the fluorescent corridor, and every time I came back I watched my daughter breathe like someone guarding a lit candle. The night gave way to dawn with nothing solved, but with evidence in bags and a detective who seemed to care, and that thin, stubborn thread of hope that someone could be found and stopped. Someone slid a phone across the table, and my world tilted again like someone had nudged a house off its foundation. Man grabbed the screen and blinked at a photo of a spreadsheet shot at a PTA meeting 2 towns over, its columns a neat, careless display of kids' names, grades, teachers, and worst of all, a rainbow-coded list of allergies next to each child. The mother I barely knew, had snapped it because she was pissed about how public everything felt and she wanted someone to see the mess. She said the file was sitting on a shared drive with multiple parents given edit access and no password. I felt my stomach drop the way you do when you put your hand on a hot stove and realized the heat was not an accident. I called Detective Lisa Morales before the words had finished forming. She took the phone like a bloodhound listening for a scent, voice low and sharp as she asked for the photos and the drive link. "Send me everything," she said, and I did, my hands still shaking. The spreadsheet was worse in the light, full names that anyone could match to faces in school photos, medical notes spelled out for anyone who clicked the link. It was a map, and it had been left in plain sight. Morales typed as I talked, her questions quick and precise, and I could hear the tightness in her breath when she realized the scale of it. That lead widened the case from a terrifying knife edge into a full-blown hazard. If someone could pull allergy lists and medical notes with a few clicks, they could weaponize private data and turn a child's lunch into a trap. Morales moved fast because she had to. Subpoenas went out to major grocers and big box stores for purchase records tied to loyalty cards, because that kind of breadcrumb often leads to a person's shopping habits. The state lab took Emma's cookie sample and ran tests for residues and cross-contamination, looking for the exact traces of almond, cashew, and shellfish proteins. I watched the evidence chain grow like a web, each new thread a small relief and a new worry. 2 days later, Morales called, and her voice was a blunt instrument. "We've got a name," she said, and I felt it hit like cold iron. The name she gave was Joanna Griffin, a small-town baker who'd been a repeat PTA vendor and a parent volunteer at the school. She stood in bake sale lines, served at holiday booths, and smiled at parents while handing out cupcakes. Loyalty card data linked purchases of almond flour, cashew meal, and the exact brand of sandwich bags found on Emma's backpack to an account used by Joanna Griffin 3 days before the field trip. The dates matched. The brand codes on the bag matched the UPC in the purchase history. It wasn't a full arrest, but it was the kind of paper trail that can move an investigation from theory to person. Morales didn't waste a second. She packed up evidence and headed to Joanna's house to interview her that afternoon, the urgency in her voice making me feel partly relieved and partly sick. I sat on the edge of a hospital bed while Emma slept under gauze and monitors, feeling like a jackhammer had taken up permanent residence behind my ribs. I thought about Joanna Griffin in the context of the town, someone everyone knew, someone who had given cookies at fall fairs and smiled in school photos. The idea that one of those smiling faces could be a thread in a violent plan made my throat close. They asked me to write down everything I could about every volunteer and vendor who'd handled food or been near the bus loop on the morning of the field trip. I tried to list names I knew and faces I didn't, to make sense of the catalog of small, trusted hands that made up the school community. Morales promised to check cameras, loyalty card databases, and vendor logs. Forensics would keep combing the cookie residue and the plastic bag. The spreadsheet photo sat in my messages like a small, accusing window into how messy oversight had been, and I kept thinking about how easily something private became public with a single careless click. The case had narrowed in a way that felt hopeful and dangerous at the same time. We had a name and a paper trail, but we still didn't know why a person would target a child. Everything clicked for me in a cold rush, and felt like someone had flipped a switch inside my skull. It all fit together ugly and clear. I remembered a PTA meeting a year ago where Joanna had stood up and loudly derided parents who insisted on allergy-safe options at bake sales and events, her voice sharp and theatrical like she was performing for a crowd. I'd been the one who read Emma's medical note into the record then, listing peanuts, tree nuts, and shellfish extracts because the school asked for it and I wanted the paperwork to match the risk. At the time I thought Joanna's anger was small business frustration, the kind of thing that happens when someone loses a sale. But now that anger lined up with what had happened and felt like something planned. My memory of that meeting became a map. I could see Joanna's face when I said Emma's allergies out loud, the way her smile thinned and her jaw tightened. She'd lost a few catering gigs afterward, parents who wanted safer options pulled their requests, and the town tends to remember those things. I started fitting pieces into places, the scathing comment at the meeting, the loyalty card purchases, the spreadsheet with open access, the note taped to my daughter's backpack. Each piece made the whole uglier. Detective Lisa Morales didn't waste time. She got a warrant and they executed it at Joanna's bakery the next morning, moving like a team that knows evidence cools fast. I watched from too far away, sick and hollow, while they went in. They found nut residues on prep surfaces and in corners you'd never clean in a normal shift, the kind of buildup that screamed repeated use. Receipts in her trash and in a box matched the purchase history Morales had pulled. The brand of almond flour, the cashew meal, the sandwich bag UPC that matched the one taped to Emma's backpack. It stacked up like a pile of small, sharp stones. Forensics sent samples to the state lab, and the reports came back with protein residues consistent with tree nuts and shellfish extract traces, not just cross-contamination levels you'd expect from a busy bakery. The lab techs didn't talk like TV experts. They spoke careful and slow, but I heard the meaning in the data. This was more than sloppy baking. A handwriting analyst compared the note on the sandwich bag to Joanna's public craft project captions and school bake sale flyers. The analyst didn't say it was a match in a courtroom kind of way, but she noted possible similarities, odd letter formations, the way certain strokes curved. It wasn't a slam dunk, but it wasn't nothing either. Joanna Griffin, baker and volunteer, denied everything when Morales knocked on her door. She called the search a witch hunt, and a neighbor's defense lawyer spun it into a story about cancel culture and how small businesses get crushed by rumors. "This is harassment," her lawyer said into the camera feeds that had started showing up outside her house. Joanna told reporters she'd been targeted because she spoke her mind about the PTA's policies. Her public face had supporters who handed out flyers defending freedom of speech and small-town grit, which made my stomach turn because it blurred the line between truth and PR. Still, the receipts and lab reports kept closing around her like lines on a drawing. Morales said the prosecutor was torn. The DA had to decide whether to charge attempted murder, which needs proof of intent to kill, or reckless endangerment, which is a more flexible charge but carries a lighter sentence. "Intent is a high bar," Morales told me one night, her voice flat. "We need direct proof they wanted to kill." The premeditation helps, emails asking for allergy lists, the purchases tied to her card, but the DA's office wants certainty. There were emails. Someone had requested the school's allergy list not as a teacher or nurse, but from an account tied to a parent volunteer role. The message wasn't explicit about harm. It asked for consolidated allergy information for planning event menus. It sounded innocent until you looked at the timing and cross-checked purchases and the note. That query for the allergy list sat like a cold, obvious brick in the evidence folder. Morales called it terrible evidence for Joanna because it showed motive and access at the same time. I tried to sleep and failed. At the hospital, I watched Emma while machines kept gentle time and documents accumulated like armor around us. I thought about the idea that someone could weaponize a simple spreadsheet and turn private medical details into danger. I thought about how a man in a small room can make a case, and how a parent can be both accused and accused of being proud. The DA's hesitance felt like a crucible. Proving murder meant reaching into a dark mind and pulling out proof. The safer charge meant Joanna might never truly face the weight of what was done. Either way, the town split into sides, and my daughter's life sat in the center of it, fragile and precious and suddenly political. It hit me like a second blow when the town turned on itself, and the PTA meetings became battlegrounds with parents yelling like they were throwing knives. And I sat through it all with my hands clenched until my knuckles ached. The school boardroom filled with two camps, one demanding ironclad protections for kids like Emma and the other saying allergies were being dramatized and caution had gone too far. People I'd waved to in pickup lines traded barbs in the open mic. I listened to grown adults argue as if a child's life was a political talking point, and it felt ugly and small and raw all at once. The district finally folded under the pressure and adopted a slate of policies that read like common sense when you say them out loud. Epinephrine stations in every main area, locked medication boxes in offices, mandatory quarterly staff training on anaphylaxis, and stricter controls on how medical information was stored and shared. We pushed a civil suit against the district for negligence, how the EpiPen had been missing, how that spreadsheet sat unprotected, and a woman I'll always be grateful to stepped in, Claire Mendoza, attorney, who took our case with a kind of calm anger that made me trust her instincts. Claire wanted systemic change as much as she wanted compensation. She demanded long-term therapy coverage for Emma and changes that would harden the school's handling of medical records. The criminal side moved in fits and starts, but Joanna Griffin eventually struck a deal and pled to a reduced charge of reckless endangerment. The judge handed her probation, community service, a large donation to an allergy research foundation, and a restraining order protecting Emma and our family. It didn't feel like justice to me, not where premeditation had been clear in emails and purchases, but it was something concrete, and it removed Joanna from the school's orbit. The DA's hesitation to charge attempted murder left a sour taste. Proving an intent to kill is a high bar. Still, the outcome forced change. Privacy protections tightened across the district, epinephrine was stocked in hallways and gyms, and the new protocols became a model for other nearby districts watching how badly things could go wrong. Claire kept at the civil case until the district agreed to settle terms that included funding for mental health support, mandatory staff training budgets, and a secure parent portal with limited access and two-factor authentication for any medical data. It felt like a slow patch to a tear in the school's fabric, but it was a patch stitched with teeth and deadlines and real consequences. Parents who had argued against precautions started to understand what it meant to carry a kid's allergy in your chest every day, and the chorus of voices for safety grew louder until the town had to listen. Emma's recovery was uneven and slow, like a winter that won't give up its chill. Therapy helped her name the fear and move past it in small steps. Exposure work with sealed foods and controlled settings gave her the tools to not panic at every crumb. She had nightmares for months and sometimes flinched at the sound of rustling plastic, but she also began to smile again at the park and shout my name when she found a ladybug. We kept an emergency injector in my pocket like a talisman, old habit, new necessity, and I learned to sleep with one eye half open for a long while. The fight left scars on all of us, visible and invisible, but it remade how our community treated real medical risk. Schools across the county copied our protocols, vendors were vetted more carefully, and the idea that a spreadsheet could be weaponized sank into policy language and practice. There are still days when anger and grief roll through me like a wave, and I catch myself watching backpacks with an old, reflexive fear. But months later, when Emma chased a kite with mud on her knees and laughter in her throat, I felt a fierce relief that edged into something like hope. In the end, what was meant to destroy her childhood forced the town to take allergies seriously and changed how schools protect kids. It didn't undo what happened, and it didn't give us the satisfaction of seeing true malice fully punished, but it did build barriers that might keep other children safe. That's a kind of hard-won justice, imperfect and incomplete, but real enough to hold when the nights still come and I keep an EpiPen warm in my pocket. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next video. And drop a comment below, I'd love to hear your thoughts.